Over the years, sometimes it seems that if you keep dealing with a problem, you might get a little desensitized to it. And we always hear of substance abuse and drug addicts and drug issues. Sometimes it's become a commonplace, and I kind of thought and felt that substance abuse, treatment, addiction, recovery was taking a backseat to a whole lot of other social issues. This thing needs to stay in the forefront. Everyone in this room has been affected directly or indirectly by drug abuse. So we called together our friends and the governor, Chris Christie, who is very passionate about this issue. There was no better time than now to bring partners together across party lines, race lines, economic lines, to come together to seriously have a conversation on how to move forward to address this issue. So we thank you for coming. And my prayer is that, as the Bible says, that we're just not going to be hearers, but doers as well. God bless you. One of the first conversations we ever had was right after the tragic death of Whitney Houston. And you made a decision to honor her in Trenton, and the fallout you got from that. You want to share that with us?
Well, sure. You know, after Whitney Houston died, it seemed to me that we honored people who were extraordinary people in our state who had contributed a great deal to our state in some way. And Whitney obviously had contributed significantly to our state from my perspective, from a cultural perspective. And so it didn't seem to me when I made the decision that it was that hard a decision, at least for me. Right. And then, you know, I issued the executive order having staff's flags lowered to half staff to honor Whitney. And the reaction that I got from a lot of quarters of not just the state, but around the country, was that it was disgraceful of me to have lowered the American flag for a drug addict. And it was that type of thing and worse, as you know, that I heard over a period of a week to 10 days, the immediate aftermath of her death and then her funeral. Yeah. So, but it was, to me, I stand by the decision today, and if it happened again today, I would do exactly the same thing. I said to folks, so we're going to define her life not by her triumphs, but from her weakness. Sure.
So, you know, we, as a church, we deal with substance abuse and the fallout from that all the time. And we do get a little angry when we look at the media portrayal of drug addicts being all inner city, African American or Hispanic people. And just right here in Newark, we know that that's just not the case.
Yep. Well, listen, I think anybody who's lived their lives in a way that's honest knows that substance abuse of some kind has touched either their family or a close friend, regardless of, as I was saying on the video, regardless of education, regardless of economic background, regardless of race or religion. It knows no bounds. And it is every day, for those who have the disease, it is like a stalker. It stalks you every day looking for the opening. And I don't know that that has anything to do with any of the ways we classify ourselves, sure, except as human beings.
Sure. Well, as a pastor, I'm always asking, you know, what can I do? Sometimes I think I'm not doing enough. Seems like the more I try to address the issue, it gets worse. But I do know it begins with changing the narrative, changing the conversation of how we view the drug addict, because we got to get out of this thing that, you know, those people. And as I said earlier, you know, those people, that's you. Yeah. And we talked about that. You want to share a little bit about what we discussed with that?
Sure. I mean, listen, you know, the fact is that we as leaders and people with experiences have to be talking about this in a much different way. And not only talking about it, but treating people in a different way. You know, talk is one thing, and it's helpful, especially if you're folks like us who who have leadership positions in the community. The way we talk about this is important, but we also have to treat people differently. We have to acknowledge it's a disease and treat their illness. And we would never stigmatize someone who has cancer. Right. Yet we feel free to stigmatize someone who may have made one bad decision, and because of their makeup, they've become an addict. And now all of a sudden we think that the best way to deal with that person is to lock them up and throw them away, because then we don't have to look at them anymore. Right. We don't have to see the failing anymore. Right. It's our failing.
Yeah, and government's job is to help people. The community's job is to respond to problems that we face. And as we go forward, what are some of the ways that government, community, church, mosque, faith community, what are some of the ways you kind of see us working together to address this?
Well, first off, we have to make treatment more available to everybody, and that's part of government's job, is that we have to do that not only by working through our criminal justice system to make it more available to those folks who walk their way through that door and find their way to treatment that way, but we also, in our community groups, like our religious groups, have to be talking to family members. Sure. And saying to them, listen, this is not something to hide. Right. This is something where we want to help to embrace you and direct you to the place where you can get relief, because I think even family members, a lot of times there's a shame that's involved in this, and somehow they see it as a failing of themselves. Yeah. And we have to work together to identify those people and to bring them out of the shadows, because in the shadows, more times than not, they're not going to get help.
Yeah, we have a saying here at New Hope, be careful how you treat people when they come to church, because although that person may be dressed up and may be clapping and moving around, you don't know what it took to get them out of the bed. You don't know what it took to get them to come to church. You don't know what people are walking around with. And that critical, judgmental spirit really has to go. And it's our prayer today that, we can make a difference in addressing that hypocritical, judgmental, Pharisee attitude.
Yeah. And I've sat, as you know, in this church and heard you say that to people and watch the effect that it has on folks. Yeah. Because it makes them think. It makes them think about that, because a lot of this stuff is reflexive, right? Right. We've grown up in a culture that has stigmatized this. Mm-hmm. And so it's not going to get changed overnight. No. We have to do it, but it's by saying those things and then acting them out and calling on other people to act them out. I told the story on the screen about this friend of mine who just recently passed away. And I can't tell you how many times all of us, friends of his, dear friends, intervened and got him to treatment and dealt with his wife and his children and tried to help him. Now, we couldn't. Yeah. He ultimately died of his addiction. But what I think it did in part too was to help his children understand and to not hate.
Right. Well, one thing I do know needs to happen, we need to hold the media accountable, for a lot of this. When we have drug problems in the inner city, those drug addicts, but the drugs get to the suburbs, it's an epidemic, the whole narrative, the whole description of it changes. And what are some of the ways maybe we could attempt to hold the media accountable?
I've been trying to figure that out for a long time. If you figure that out for me, I'd be forever indebted. No, listen, I think it's part of the way we conduct ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. We have to speak out against both of those things. Mm-hmm. See, when I'm in suburban New Jersey and folks are talking about, well, we need to do something about this, and they think that stricter enforcement of the law is the way to go. Now, listen, people who commit violent acts, we all agree, need to be dealt with severely and separated from society for a period of time. But we have a lot of folks every day who don't even come in touch with the criminal justice system. They get lucky. Yeah. We need to be talking about those folks too. Then Absolutely. It starts to take away the stigma of, well, it's just about a bunch of criminals in the city. Right. No, it's not. It's about kids in high school in suburban New Jersey. It's about kids working on a farm in rural New Jersey who on Friday or Saturday nights go out and they figure out their way to buy drugs, either by coming into some of the cities or by having the drugs come to them.
Absolutely.
And we have to be talking about all those people. There's got to be a separation on this, that it's not always about the criminal act. It's about the disease. Right. And talking about those things in a way that helps to remove some of that stigma. And maybe by doing that, we get the media to look at it in a different way. Sure. Although, I don't know how much hope I hold out, Joe, but you're a more hopeful guy than I am.
Well, one thing I think you understood, and I applaud you for, is you understood to address this properly, you have to change the law. Legislation has to be put forward, to rather than lock a drug addict up, change the law, send the addict to treatment. And there are a lot of ways that we need to address this from a legal standpoint, and that's when we're going to need politicians to lay down politics and look for what's best for the people.
Well, we worked, you and I have worked real hard on this together over the course of the last number of years, and so it means for folks from my party to say, listen, the war on drugs, as well intended as it was, is a failure. With 23 million folks addicted, it's not working.
Right.
And so you have to change the laws to do what we've done here in New Jersey, which is to have drug courts in every county and have it not be mandatory incarceration, but mandatory treatment. And even with that, it was controversial because I had some people in the other party say, well, you shouldn't mandate treatment because if the person's not ready for it, they're not going to go. And
like they're just ready for jail, though.
Yeah, right. But I mean, but they will be ready to go sit in that cell,
yeah,
And also, I've met plenty of people who have had this disease who are in denial. Mm-hmm. And it's only getting them into treatment where they're surrounded by other people who have had the same problem, who speak to them in a language they understand and make them understand that they have a problem. The next thing we need to do is not to have our jails just be storehouses for people who only are in there because they're poor. Mm-hmm. And we made the changes this year to make sure that we have a system in place where if people are nonviolent offenders and they're in prison, what essentially is a debtor's prison, because they don't have $250 for bail, well, we need to let those folks out. Yeah. Because what happens is they lose their jobs, they lose their homes, and for many people, no matter how well off you have been, economically or otherwise, that spiral can lead you to addiction as well, even if addiction isn't what brought you there in the first place.
Which leads to the importance of banning the box.
That was the third
because
thing.
A lot of times, you're asked, have you committed a crime? A lot of times, the crime people commit is drug-related. Some stupid night that could happen to anybody. They just got caught. Yep. Wrong place, wrong time. And now an opportunity to be able to seek employment without that dark cloud hanging over your shoulder.
Well, to me, it's all these things needed to be done together, and that's why we proposed them together. Mm-hmm. We didn't get them all done together, but now they're all done. Mm-hmm. And it's about setting up, again, if you ban the box, it's again another removal of the stigma. And that removes the stigma. The mandatory jail time being removed removes the stigma. The debtor's prison part of it removes the stigma. And so all of those things are things that go at trying to look at this a different way, talk about it, and as you said, have the laws that govern our society treat it a different way.
We have a lot of partners in this room, clergy, Bishop Jethro James is here, and others that we sometimes feel we're out here by ourselves. It's the 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. As much work as we do here, the inner city, the violence, all of that has such a drug stigma to it as well. I think a day like today is encouraging to all of us, whatever area we're in, to know that we may not see each other every day, may not talk every day, but we're in this thing together, fighting the same cause.
Well, listen, that's why I thought it was so important, and so I'm so happy that you were willing to host this here. This is a special place.
Yes.
And it's a place that brings people together all the time to face challenges in the community, to face challenges in each other's lives. And I think it's the perfect place to have this conversation. It's a place where there is no judgment.
Right.
And so, to me, us all understanding that we're in this together, part of it is our deeds. We have to continue to do this. We have to continue to be talking about these things and acting,
right,
not only in our professional capacities, but in our personal capacities. That, when we have people who are in trouble, we don't run the other way, we run towards them. Yeah. Those people need to be embraced. And they need to be spoken to and convinced that there is help there. Yeah. And it's not perfect, but it's the only avenue. Yeah.
So as we wrap up, a lot of times, church people say, oh, we're praying for them. We're praying for them. But My dad used to say, you got to get through praying, put some feet on your prayer and get some work done. So prayerfully, we can put some feet on all of this, and let's make a difference.
Listen, there's no other way to do this. The prayer by itself is not enough. It's not enough. You know, I really believe God places us on this earth as instruments of himself. Mm-hmm. And so if, in fact, we're praying to him to help, you know, I used to pray for things all the time when I was a kid. Yeah. And my grandmother, who used to go to church every day, encouraged me to pray. I remember praying for something one time that I didn't get. And I went to my grandmother and I said, man, it doesn't work. I said, you know, I've been praying and God didn't answer my prayer. And she said, oh, Chris, God always answers your prayers. Sometimes the answer is no. No, yeah.
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah. And so prayer by itself sometimes is not enough. It's about getting into action. Yeah. And that's why I'm so glad you're willing to do this today, and all the people that we have participating are willing to do it, because it's another step in the right direction to make our state a model for what the rest of the country should be doing by taking care of our own.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, we're here to talk about stigma and from the perspective of treatment providers. And I'd like to get right into this with you, Dr. Shore. I'd like to ask, have you, in your experiences, have you encountered shame around addiction with the people that you've served? If so, what does that look like? And has that been a roadblock for people engaging in treatment and continuing in their recovery?
Absolutely. Shame is ubiquitous with pretty much every patient I see. I've wanted to first differentiate for everybody the difference between shame and guilt. Guilt refers, as a general sense, to something we feel badly about having done, an action perhaps that we took or didn't take. Shame is referring to the core belief of who we are as people, as individuals. And it really gets at the core of what addiction does to folks. One thing that's real important is to look at the terminology we use when we're talking about shame. Using the word addiction is so pejorative. It's such a negative word for everybody. We actually, in our associations in the medical field, now use the word substance use disorders, which I think really accurately describes what this is all about. It's a disease, it's a disorder, and it's very treatable. The shame also comes through the two different models that so many people cling to, that were mentioned earlier. The moral model, you're a bad person if you have a substance use disorder, and the willpower model, that somehow you're a weak person. Nancy Reagan's just say no approach to doing something about drugs. We use the disease model. This is a compulsive disorder. There's a loss of control, continued use despite continuing consequences from the use. And we now know that there's a change in brain reward pathways. This is a neurological disorder. There are clearly demonstrated changes in the brain. We don't have any prejudice against people with diseases of other organ systems, diabetes, hypertension. We need to approach this with the brain disease of addiction the same way. We'll go a long way towards reducing stigma. Some ways we can help patients combat the stigma and the shame associated with it is, of course, to explore their feelings and their ideas, the patient and their family members. We have to encourage them to get involved with other recovering people. There's no better way to reduce the shame and the stigma for an individual than to get involved in group therapy and the 12-step program, where you're surrounded by other people just like yourself. And even more so, seeing people that have succeeded and done better and made a life for themselves, who were just like you when they started the program. I also recommend readings. There's certain books that can really help with information, and certainly counseling.
Okay, thank you. Evelyn, can you talk about how stigma impacts women entering treatment?
Yes. One of the things that I find is one of the things that we see constantly in our field is that women come into treatment and they're very embarrassed. They feel a lot of shame because of the fact that if they do come into treatment, if they have children, there's a possibility that DIFUS will come and take their children. Therefore, we don't see them as readily as we would see men or other people involved. The other thing is when women come into treatment, they have to relive their story, and their story is not a pretty one. Many women have to do a lot of things that they're very sorry for, and then they have to come in and they feel that people are looking down at them because they had to sell their body to get the drugs that they were using. Also, when women come into treatment, they don't come in alone. They have families. They love their children. Many times, just because a woman is using drugs or alcohol, it doesn't mean that they don't love their children. It means that at this time, they're not able to parent their children. And rather than throw them in jail or make them feel less than, we should provide gender-specific treatment so that they get their needs met, which are very different than a male in treatment.
Thank you. Manny, can you talk about how stigma impacts the family?
Sure. Thank you. Well, I was thinking before about in schools right now, there are kids who would raise their hands and say, when I grow up, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a governor, I want to be a pastor. They never say, I want to be a drug addict. That never happens. And we forget that face. We forget that person. It's a disease. It's an addiction. We have to admit that through the course of addiction, people do things. They do bad things. Bad things happen. They cause bad things to happen, which perpetuates the stigma. But, it's up to us, starting with the self, much like it was said. It's up to the society. It's up to the dinner, a discussion at the table with your family, with a friend who you may know needs help, but you stay quiet because you protect their shame or because you don't want to pry. It is such an entrenched denial and disease system that it's really up to us to make an impact on others. I would be remiss if as a professional I didn't talk about the IMD for a second, that even in healthcare, we have an Affordable Care Act that says we will not pay for detox and we will not pay for a residential program. I don't understand that. I really don't understand that. So if society, if the professionals in society, if administrations are not telling the public that this is a disease, how can we expect people to feel like this is a disease? And I think it goes back to the child. No child ever wakes up and says, I want to be an addict.
Dr. Baxter, we know that there's also stigma that exists in the treatment community and stigma around certain modalities of treatment. Could you talk a little bit about some of that stigma as it relates to things like medication-assisted therapies?
Yes, thank you very much. I think that we all can agree that there is a stigma, and there are many approaches, but I think that one of the things that we need to start with is in our training programs for medical school, for nursing school, and for other allied health to teach that it is a disease. It's a chronic medical illness, has certain genetic pieces that cannot be avoided, just like diabetes and hypertension and asthma, and that certainly, as it has been said, and I think I was the first one to say it, that nobody ever woke up and said, I think I'll go become an addict. But we need to start to reduce the stigma by teaching in our allied health institutions, so that when healthcare professionals primary care, OBGYNs, and others, do start to ask questions that you don't shame a person by saying, you don't use drugs, do you? Or you're not an alcoholic, are you? But we need to have a more of a general approach and take an alcohol history, take a drug use history. So as providers, we need to learn to do a better job to reduce the stigma in our approach to our patients. And lastly, I'd like to also say that addiction treatment works. When we treat people with addiction, just like we treat patients with other chronic medical illnesses, our patients get well. And they get well at a higher rate than those that we treat for diabetes, hypertension, and asthma. So I think that a lot of reducing the stigma falls into our laps.
Can you talk to us about some of the different roads to recovery, like things like medication-assisted therapies and?
Yes, previously, before the late 1990s, everybody thought that addiction treatment was voodoo medicine, basically because we didn't have any lab data to show that people had the problem. Now we got the PET scans, and we have the neurochemistry is mapped out. So pharmaceutical companies have been able to target these areas and develop medications. So now we have medication-assisted therapy, just like all of the other chronic medical illnesses. And we have an opportunity to help people to get better that formerly didn't get better. I know that I've been treating folks with addiction for 26 years, and for the first 15 years, I told people, don't drink, don't think, and go to meetings, because that's all that I had. But today, we have medication-assisted therapy, and we can stop some of the craving that people have. We can actually shorten the brief periods of use with other medications, and we can also manage co-occurring psychiatric disorders. In the old days, we didn't have that. We do today. And to have those tools and not use them is malpractice in my opinion.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I want to ask one last question. Everyone is aware of the fact that we have a opioid dependence epidemic here nationally and in the state of New Jersey. Are we prepared to deal with this? Do we have enough resources? Is access to treatment available for everyone? I hear a lot about long waiting lists.
There is treatment, there is access, there is availability. We clearly need more beds. We need more clinicians and providers. But to get back to the area of stigma, we also have to face the fact, taking this further from what Dr. Baxter was saying, that there are many clinicians that work in the field that maintain stigma against medication-assisted treatments. In the treatment community, if we look at the residential treatment centers, the rehabs, the data is only 1 out of 5 will even consider medication-assisted treatment to help people maintain sobriety after they leave treatment. So we have a job to do as well with our treatment facilities.
Manny, would you like to
Mike,
let you end with talking about the demand for treatment services?
Despite the efforts, the great efforts, it's my understanding that only 1 in 6 people who seek care are able to get that care. So while there is access, often it's a limited access. And even then, to wrap it up with stigma, many families who have insurance say we're afraid to use it because our child is not going to be able to get into a school. They're going to be labeled a particular way. So not only is there a need for access, but even those who have the means to get help are afraid.
Okay, so we have to wrap this up. I want to thank all of you very much for your participation and your insight. It was very helpful, and thank you.
To Governor Christie and to Pastor Carter, for the record, 2 miracles happened today. One is that we have a governor who's publicly talking about the shame of addiction, and 2, that Joe Carter did not take a collection with this many people in the sanctuary. standards are slipping. You know, white people know how to give money in church too. You know, we've all seen the scourge of addiction, and I think we wrestled with how there's such a shame associated, and I think what the governor and Pastor Carter is trying to do here today is to understand that we need to put this in the bright light of day and to grapple with it honestly, authentically, and transparently. And for a lot of families, frankly, it's something that's whispered about, but not necessarily dealt with honestly. And Chief, you've been in PD how many years?
I've been a police officer for about 30 years.
30 years. So you have your pension. No,
He said it, not me.
So obviously you locked, in the course of those 30 years, you locked up people for CDS, for possession, for distribution. Could you just share a little bit about what happened with you personally and your family? And
Well, over those 30 years, not only did I have the honor and the privilege of serving the community by arresting people, but I also had the honor and duty to save some people's lives, and some of those people were people who had overdosed on drugs. One of those instances happened in April of 2013, and I took all the normal steps that you would take to save someone's life who had overdosed on heroin. The difference that day was, though, it was my son. So, and up until that point, again, because of countless encounters with people addicted to drugs and selling drugs, I had, up until that point, a completely different perspective. That day opened my eyes.
so who did drugs beforehand, or what did an addict look like beforehand?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I was, up until that point, I was absolutely one of those people who pictured them as that ghoul in the alley in the inner city with a needle sticking out of their arm.
Yeah.
And that day opened my eyes to a completely different layer of the problem, that it exists
Everywhere.
everywhere.
Even in the upstairs bedroom.
Exactly.
Rob, could you talk a little bit about your family and your family's struggles with addiction and what
Right.
it's done for
Well,
you?
I mean, if you asked me this a few years ago, I probably wouldn't be up here being able to speak about it. But because of where I've worked, now I have a real understanding that it needs to be talked about, it needs to be spoken about. Now, you know, I don't have a son or a daughter, you know. I grew up with it. I grew up with my mother who, she was an alcoholic, and
Just pull the mic up.
sure. She was an alcoholic, and her brother was an alcoholic, as well as my grandfather. So from a very young age, I understood that
There was a pattern in your family.
Right. So
what did you do about that, knowing that maybe there's a propensity, maybe even a probability for addiction or alcoholism? What did you do with that?
Well, I mean, it was scary because from a very young age, I knew that it could happen to me. I mean, it's been in my family for generations now, and it may be me. And that was hard to deal with.
So it's important to learn about the disease, to learn what should be done, to learn about the cognitive
Correct.
processes.
And I have the privilege as working at Daytop Preparatory School in Mendham as the phys ed teacher. And over these past 2-3 years now, if I wasn't around it and I didn't see it every day,
It changes you.
It does. I mean,
does change you.
like I said, I wouldn't be up here speaking.
Cass belongs to a group that have in the best sense of the word,
I don't
cause
belong
beautiful
to
trouble.
It. We are the group.
You are the group.
We are the group.
So just tell us a little bit about your family story.
1997, our son Christian, he was 27 years old. He was a beautiful human being, inside and out, hard worker. But he chose to try an opiate, heroin, when he was 25, and he died at 27. So I was fortunate enough to meet 3 amazing women through divine intervention, we call it, and we formed Parent to Parent. And we support the parents.
And what kind of, like when parents come to talk about their sons or their daughters' addiction or overdose, one of the things the governor talked about and Pastor Carter talked about is shame. What sense of shame do you find parents have when they approach you?
We find many things with the parents. I mean, some of them can't even tell their own sister or their own brother, their family. They're ashamed to tell their family. And we give the parents hope, tell them they're not alone. We guide and direct them. We have workshops to educate them. And they know we care. They can contact us at any time.
So Michael, why is it so important to, in the bright light of day, to recognize this disease and to claim it?
The more we know about the disease, the less stigma there's going to be in society. You know, personally, my daughter went to Daytop as well, and the disease of addiction was ripping apart my family. Now, my family situation was such that I had a good job, lived in a nice town, I had the American dream. The only thing I was missing was the white picket fence. You know, addiction was not in my family, so I was completely at loss as to what to do. Plus, the stigma, God forbid, the neighbors find out that I have a child who's got a drug problem. I was at loss. I didn't know what to do.
So what happens if the neighbors find out your daughter has a drug problem?
Well, at the time.
Yeah, at the time.
It was, I thought hard about that question because I've tried to develop some insight into that. And what I came up with, it came about me. It was that people would think that I am a bad parent. All right? It wasn't about my daughter and her issue, it was about me. So I had a lot of time to look into myself as to what the issues really are, and I had to overcome that. And I had to learn about the disease of addiction. And the more I learned about the disease of addiction, the more I was able to process that grief, really, that I was going through, that my daughter, her youth is being robbed, my family is being destroyed, and I was able to get through.
And how ugly is it to the whole family? What does it do to the family?
Well, we had daily routines of arguing, yelling. We've had police come to our house at times to settle disputes. It was chaos, just pure chaos. I remember driving home, pulling into the driveway, and this knot in my stomach. I said, oh, what am I going to be facing today? I really don't want to be here. But I had to. I had to try to keep the family together. And eventually she went to Daytop, and that's when I really learned about addiction. I learned about what my role in and what I can do to help myself and to pass on some of the guidance that people shared with me. I can pass on to others.
So Rob, when you talk to young people, when you think of addicts, what do people think of? Hold the microphone up.
They think of no goods, low lifes, but when you really get to know these people and you get to know these kids, they're just like everyday children.
The point is, these kids are us. These families are us.
Absolutely, and all they want to do is have somebody, to help them and to reach out to. And
so, Chief, the governor's been talking about diversion and drug court and treatment. Is he some sort of crazy liberal?
You're asking a cop that?
Yeah, exactly.
No, just kidding. No, I'm absolutely very grateful for the governor's not losing momentum on this project. To me and to many people, clearly, this is not just a political agenda. This is just the right thing to do, despite everything else. So, and I'm very proud to be a part of it. And one of the things that
what do you think? What do you think when, before you thought of addiction and your son, how has that changed it with your son's, you know, with what you grapple with what your family faced? Now, how do you approach addiction now? What goes on in your circuitry?
I just told a story before I came up here to somebody that up until what happened with my son, if I, as a police officer or as the chief, got some intelligence about someone who had begun to use heroin, I would just write a note, it would go to the detective bureau, and they would investigate it. Maybe a few months later, an arrest would result. Right after this happened with my son, I got some of that intel, and instead of that, I called the mother of the kid who was suspected, and long story short, through all the denial, which is also deadly, she just celebrated 1 year clean.
So now, and I appreciate what you said. So two things happened. One, you approach this as a disease as opposed to just a traditional law enforcement lockup. And the second point that you made is that when you're filled with shame, denial is sometimes, unfortunately, a rational reaction. And so I think what we're saying here is that we need to deal with it honestly, authentically, straight on. We need to look at treatment because this is a disease. And we need to accept that there can be good people who are addicts. And the solution is treatment as opposed to just a traditional law enforcement. We've got to look at diversionary process. Tom?
No.
My prosecutor has a very good way of putting it. We're not going to arrest our way out of this problem.
Sure. All right. I just got the 2-second sign. So quick, last thoughts. It can happen to you, ripple effect of addiction. I just wanted to say, if you had to deliver one message to New Jersey, what would you say? Quick.
We're not going to arrest our way out of this problem.
People need to know that it's a disease.
People are dying while on waiting lists like my son Christian did. We need more treatment capacity. We need detox. Yeah.
You're not alone. You're really not alone. There's many of us that are suffering. A lot of families are suffering. So keep talking.
And to be honest, to be straightforward, to seek available treatment, and for me to believe that the third step, with God, all things are possible. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to see you all here today. I'm Lori Dew, and I'm grateful to say that I am a woman in long-term recovery from alcoholism and drug addiction. For me, that means that I haven't had a drink or a drug since March 14th of 2007. And if you had told me 8 years ago that I would be sitting here in the presence of all you fine people, having been invited by a governor of a state to come talk about this, just 2 weeks after I spoke at the White House about this very important issue, I would have laughed. That's because I used to sleep on the office of my floor. I was so hungover I couldn't move. I did it day after day, year after year. But since I found recovery, everything has changed. So, I like what's happening here in New Jersey. I like the governor's commitment to this issue. I hope that other states will follow suit. I like that the state's first recovery high school opened today. That is a major achievement. So thank you, Governor Christie, and thank you, Pastor Joe. This is the right thing to do. I take great pleasure in introducing you to the two panelists today. You're going to recognize this one already. And this one you're going to recognize after today because he's got a brand new book out and he's going to be big time. Ray Lucas, former quarterback for the New England Patriots, the New York Jets, the Miami Dolphins, the Baltimore Ravens. He is the author, oh wow, yeah, that's right. He is author of a book that just came out a couple of weeks ago called Under Pressure. It's a memoir about his own struggle with addiction and the joys of recovery. Most importantly, he wanted me to tell you that he's married and has 3 beautiful daughters. Also joining us is Jesse Schenker. He is the chef and owner of 2 fabulous restaurants in New York City, Reset and The Gander, and he is author of that new memoir I mentioned just a moment ago called All or Nothing, One Chef's Appetite for the Extreme. Good to see you, Jesse. So Ray, let me start with you. You and I were chatting, and you were talking about how after you had back surgery after leaving the NFL in 2005, you very quickly became addicted to painkillers. And in fact, at one point, you were popping up to 50 or 60 pills a day. And this went on for year after year. And we were all joking earlier about how people always said to us, why didn't you just stop? It's not that easy, is it?
No, it's definitely not. I've had 3 neck surgeries. Thank God a group called PASS came and saved my life. When I first went to PASS, I was probably taking anywhere from 19 to 29 different medications. I've had over 20 concussions, so I've had depression. You name it, I've had it. When you leave the NFL, you only have insurance for 5 years, and it's hard to get insurance to cover pre-existing injuries. So when my neck started going, it was so bad where the spasms were so violent that I would have to tighten down my arms so my arms wouldn't flare out. Well, I was dressed in my 3-piece suit and I was working in the city, and I was sitting on the train with my earphones in, and the spasms were coming so bad that sometimes I couldn't time it and tighten my shoulders down. So as they went out, I punched a lady in her chest who was probably 80 years old. I got off at the next stop, and I was, telling her it's an NFL injury. I got off the next stop in tears. I called my wife and said, I'm never coming back to work again, because it was just completely embarrassing. I started to take painkillers, even when I was playing, but that's part of the NFL. You get banged up, you take painkillers. I started off, the normal way, I guess, for normal, if you can be normal taking pills, about 100 a month, which quickly escalated to 1,400 pills a month, and sometimes 50 to 80 a day. I was taking anything I could get my hands on: Vicodin, Roxys, Oxys, Percocet, Somas, Ambien, Lunesta. I had fentanyl patches where you're supposed to wear 1 fentanyl patch. I had 6 on my body. And the funny story about that was my wife thought that was normal, because I told her, yeah, that's normal, baby, just put 6 on. And we went to the doctor, and I would never let her come in. So finally she comes into the doctor's office and she says, hey doc, what's the deal with the fentanyl patches? And he goes, oh, it's another form of painkillers. And then she said, oh, okay, well, how many is he supposed to wear? And he said, 1. And I was like, oh, I'm in trouble. She was like, he's got 6 on right now. She sold me right out to the doctor, so.
And that continued for years and years.
Yes.
So you and I were chatting, and you said, I thought I was fooling everyone.
Well, when you're an addict.
But really, you were only fooling yourself.
When you're an addict, you do this. You never do this.
Yeah.
You always point the finger. You never point the thumb. And my addiction was so bad that I really thought I was fooling everyone. Like, I thought I was a fantastic liar. But the only person I was fooling was myself. And the other problem I had was I looked terrible. Like, I'm a quarterback. I like to be pretty. I like to have my stuff done.
You are pretty, don't worry.
And I couldn't even shave because I couldn't stand to look at that guy that I saw in the mirror. I didn't know who he was. I thought, I was still doing my TV shows. I thought I was, sexy. And then I saw an HBO special where I looked like the Crypt Keeper. And I was 168 pounds. And I thought, again, that I was fooling everybody. In reality, just me.
You talked about not being able to look at yourself in the mirror. I remember that, feeling that so much. And even while I was engaged in a very public career as a TV news anchor on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, I could not bear to look at myself in the mirror. It was too painful, because I had such a shameful secret. Secrecy is such a big part of this disease. Why do you think it is, Jesse, that despite the fact that 23 million people in this country have our disease, they meet the criterion for addiction, it's still shrouded in such secrecy and shame and pain?
Well, I think for me, the disease of addiction it's cunning and it's powerful. And when I was 21 years old, I got clean, and I hit a hard, quick, rough bottom. I was smoking crack on the streets. I went to jail. I was homeless, and I channeled that passion for food that I always had growing up into turning it around, and really the cooking in the kitchen saved my life. So in that world of getting clean and learning and being through rehab and speaking to people, it really is a preconceived notion. People think we are bad. People think we are, and there's not enough people like Ray and you and myself that are telling our story. That's why I wrote this book, to tell my story and save people and show people they don't have to hit those bottoms and they don't have to go through that.
You know, we're not bad people trying to get good. We're sick people trying to get better.
That's right.
I think. You have a tattoo on your wrist, and I want you to show everybody the tattoo. You guys won't be able to see it in the back, but the tattoo says all or none. What does that mean?
Well, all or none for me, it's also the title of my book, All or Nothing, is really the way I've lived my life. And it goes back to first smoking pot at 12 and feeling, you know, I felt uneasy as a child, and I know every addict can relate to that feeling of just not feeling a part of, not feeling right, not knowing what it is. And when I hit that joint when I was 12, just something struck. And I ran, and I hit a hard bottom really fast. And, you know, I was just very all or nothing. And there was always the pulse of food and cooking with my grandmother that was there. And when I got clean and I went to jail, and I remember sitting in the back of the cop car on July 4th, 2007, or July 8th, 2004, excuse me, and I sat in the back of the cop car, and I knew I was going to jail. I knew I was going to be dope sick. I felt at peace. I had surrendered. And from there, I got into the kitchen, and I pushed, and I channeled that passion, and I channeled that intensity and that same, you know, tenacity that drove me down so hard, brought me up in the kitchen, and being, you know, cooking with food really saved my life.
Yeah, not only did it save your life, you also won Iron Chef America, and you have a new book, and you have restaurants. So look at you now.
People don't have to suffer.
Yeah.
I'm telling my story, and people don't have to suffer. They can read this book. They can listen to read Ray's book. They can listen to us, and there's a way out. There's a way out, and there's hope. And we've all, I mean, I ate at dumpsters, I shot drugs in my arm, I've overdosed, and I'm sitting here today and I'm telling it, you don't have to do there, you don't have to go there.
A minute ago you mentioned the word surrender, and you know, any good general in battle would tell you to never surrender, never give up, but when it comes to our disease of addiction, that's exactly what you have to do, is surrender. Ray, let me ask you, we're all here today because we're proof that recovery works. We should be dead, but we're not because we got clean. If you would, tell me what you think the greatest gifts are in your life and the greatest possibilities that you now have in your life as a result of giving up drugs.
Well, the funny part was when he said surrender, I can't use the word. You can't get to where I've gotten to in the professional football using the word surrender or weakness or admitting that you need help. And everything that was my strength that got me to the top of the mountain became my crutch when I was addicted. Like he said, when I hit rock bottom, it was okay for me. I was cool with it. And even after my 3 neck surgeries, when I went to rehab, I found out exactly what is important in my life. And it's really simple. I want to be the best husband I could be and the best father, and everything else is secondary. So yes, do I work 7 days a week? Do I do all my TV shows? Yes, but I do it for the people who stood by me. Like, you know, in my story is I have a woman who stuck by me where 99% of the women that go through what I put them through leave. And I have 3 beautiful daughters that she kept them going the whole time, bankrupted us, had to sell the house, it was gonna be repossessed. And she stood by me, and she's probably the toughest woman, and I played football for my whole life, and she's tougher than any dude that I have ever met. So when I wake up in the morning, I do 2 things. And, you know, I remember Governor Christie said, you know, praying for stuff. I don't pray for stuff anymore because I know I'm blessed. I thank God every day that I have a hot, sexy Cuban woman sitting right next to me, and that my daughters are healthy, and everything else after that is downhill. So,
Right. You know, you got your priorities straight. We're on the last day of National Recovery Month. It is the month of September, and our color is purple. We all know that October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and the color is pink. But I would love to get to the point at some point in our society where we're seeing people wearing purple, and the Empire State Building is lit up purple, just like it is pink during October, and that we see professional athletes wearing purple on their uniforms the way they wear pink. And you're about to see it starting this weekend. All the players are going to be wearing pink. What do we need to do, Jesse, to get to that point where this issue is getting the kind of attention that other diseases like AIDS and breast cancer get?
We need to do exactly what we're doing today. Everybody needs to continue to come together and share their story and share their hope and their strength. And we need to communicate, and we got to spread the word. I mean, it's like everything else, and it's just as important. And people are dying and suffering on a daily basis. Families are affected, and us coming to the stage today, and Governor Christie putting this together and being able to share this is a start in the right direction. We just need to keep moving forward and keep putting our feet in front of each other and work hard to get the message out.
You know what the funny part is? And
very quickly, we got to go.
And I think there's a lot more of us than there are of you.
Oh, I hope you're right.
True that.
And I think the fact that there's a lot of people with this struggle, that 3 people who I was going to drive my truck off the George Washington Bridge. I was ready to kill myself and told everybody I was going to do it. I was calm with it. I was cool with it. The pain went away. The anxiety went away. Once I made the decision to kill myself, everything was okay. For not once did I think about my family, my friends, everybody around me. And together with Governor Christie and all these doctors that spoke before, and the chief over there, if we bring it to the forefront, we could help. You're not alone, and we've made it out, and so can you.
Yeah, and you know what? I know I probably speak for both of you when I say the amount of gratitude that I have for being welcomed to this event. We're not going to be closeted anymore. We are out, and we're proud. And frankly, I think we can learn a whole lot from some other very popular movements out there. We've got to put a face on this disease, and that's why I'm so grateful that the governor had this event today to give us, the survivors, the people who live with this every day, the people who are recovering from this disease, to show everybody that we can do it. It's possible. I guess my final word would be, we can do together what we cannot do apart. So I thank you all so much for welcoming us to the stage today.
So, Valerie.
I'm Valerie.
You're Valerie. Hi, Valerie.
How are you?
I understand you have an interesting connection with being in this church today, and the steps, kind of life coming a little full circle for you.
Yes, my addiction manifested. I used over 33 years, and I started at an early age. But when I realized I had a problem, it manifested right down the street, which was called Baxter Terrace at the time, which is torn down now. That's when I realized I needed some help, but the help wasn't available like it was today. I made a decision to, I was a heroin user, and I made a decision to get on methadone because I thought that would be the answer. Back then, in the 90s, that wasn't the answer. So, I struggled for 4 years, and back in 93, and in 1997, I found myself at Eva's Village. And that was the last place I went to, and the first thing that worked, and that was 17 years ago.
Reverend Anthony Hawthorne used to run our substance abuse program here at the church, being in recovery. And while running the program, he had some setbacks himself. And Anthony preaches and motivates all the time about that moment of being sick and tired of being sick and tired. I mean, what can you talk to that moment? Because that's a little different from everybody, that being sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Well, this whole stage right now, I was kind of concerned because it started from a conversation in your office, and it was very impromptu, and we just talked. We just talked, and that was one of the things, Governor Christie, that really stuck out, right? Because all the masks were down. It was real. It was real, and for me, it got to the point where as though live or die. In having lived, that's one of the things about recovery for me, that I think that those of us who are in recovery, right, once you know a better way, then you have a choice. For those who don't have a better way, we need to be the voices to tell them, listen, there is a better way. And in the setback part, right, if you get back out there again, you ask God to bring those things back to memories that make you well. And that part really stuck out. I remember what it was like to be in recovery. I remember what it was like to be counted on and depended on to show up. And those things made a difference.
Y'all can tell he's preaching, right? Y'all got it? he can't help it. Craig, you want to talk about, we heard this word today, and I think it's very important that we address that feeling of shame that comes with addiction and recovery.
Yeah, I think the first panel, Doctor, talked about shame being a feeling of who you are as a person. And that's such a big symptom of the disease of addiction that it causes you to feel shame of who you are, prevents you from reaching out and asking for help. And it's what keeps those of us who have suffered through addiction for however long, 2 years, 3 years, 32 years, it prevents us from seeking out and asking for that help and keeps us suffering that addiction for so long. And some of the panelists earlier talked about, you know, the stigma surrounding addiction is that society looks at people who are addicts as those people. Well, we are those people who need help.
Right.
Because we feel so ashamed of our disease, we can't ask for it. When I went through my addiction, I couldn't ask for it myself. I found myself in a situation, I was 16 years old. I had my head in a toilet in a crack house in Harlem. My heart was racing. I was smoking crack and throwing up from it, and I was on the verge of dying. And when I got home, my family and my friends said, that's enough. And like Jesse had talked about surrendering, I accepted that that was enough. And I didn't want to feel that shame anymore. And so because people reached out to me and offered the help and say, you're one of those people, you need help, instead of you're one of those people, get out of here. I was fortunate enough to be put in a place where I could go through recovery, and that's where I am today.
Man, so Wilder, so when you think about the stigma that society puts on the addict, did you ever wonder what society thought of you while you were going through? Or people in general?
Well, I've encountered recently, I went to go get my ID, and when I went up for help, they had to call the supervisor, because they were saying I had a driver's license back in 1983 in New Jersey. I've never had a license in New Jersey. I didn't even live in New Jersey. I lived out in Queens, and she was very helpful in the beginning. She went to the back, she came back, I saw the difference in her, and she says, well, you have a drug charge. I go, yes. That was back in 2012. I go, what does that have to do with me getting an ID? I says, what I'm here is saying that I've never had a license back in 1983. I never lived here in Jersey. And she came out and she says, well, you people don't remember where you live. So, you know, I was like in shock. I had my daughter back in 1985 in Queens. I lived in Queens. I never was even dealing in drugs at that time. So this is the stigma that's out there. You know, they believe that just because you have a record that you're a criminal and you just forget about things, and that's not so.
Going through, Shirley, going through your process of recovery, has that changed how you view other addicts as well?
Oh, definitely. I was one of those addicts who thought I was better than. You know, for 17 years I had this image to uphold, you know, and because I didn't do some of the things that, you know, people I was around did to use, I thought I was better. Because my clothes was clean, I thought I was better. You know, but coming through this process with the help of a lot of wonderful people, I know I'm no different than that one that was in the crack house or, you know, in the alley somewhere. Like, I'm no different.
So you were a judgmental drug addict?
Very much so. Very judgmental. Very judgmental because I was an only child. You know, my mother was an active addict, you know, but I never wanted for anything. I chose to go out to the streets, you know, and the decision was just like, it was just there. This is what I was a very lonely girl in a house full of people, you know, so it was the right thing to do, you know, but in this process, I was able to learn, like, you're never alone. You know, it's always somebody that you know what's really going on. And I was able to just meet some wonderful people through integrity, you know. Starting out, I was incarcerated for the 5th time, and I just said, something got to give, you know. Been down prison twice, and that was easy for me. You know, I can honestly say drug court saved my life. I'm not trying to be the, you know, drug court spokesperson or anything. But I can honestly say drug court was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Wow. So Cheryl, Anthony and I, we've talked all the time about hitting bottom. And we say sometimes every time you think you hit bottom, you found out it's another bottom under that bottom. Until it get to the point to where you just keep hitting down, down, down. You say, that's it. What was it that caused you to seek help and get change?
What caused me to seek help was a lot of the guilt and shame that I felt. I felt guilty of who I had become and shameful of what I had done to my family. One day my mother told me I wasn't even the person that she had raised. But still, that wasn't enough for me. That was a bottom when my mother was afraid for me and afraid of me. But still, that wasn't enough to keep me clean, because I had tried numerous times. I had a man put a gun to my head and take my money, and still, that wasn't enough to stop me, because after I got away, I went to use. What made me seek help was I started to see evidence of other recovering addicts. You know, before I hadn't seen it. I didn't believe it. I was unwilling to see that recovery works. But once I tried it and started taking suggestions from people who were living that way of life, I saw that it was open for me as well. And the more that I take suggestions from other people who are in recovery, the better my life gets. And thank God Almighty, I am free at last.
Hallelujah. Well, Governor McGreevey said that I was tempted to take a collection. I'm more tempted to take a text. In Scripture, the story of the prodigal son who leaves the love of his father and goes up to what Jesus says, the far country. He ends up in the hog pen. In the Bible, one of my favorite phrases in Scripture, it says, and he came to himself. And he came to himself, or he came to his senses, and he said, I'm going back home. Either one of you can just chime in. What was that feeling for you when you made it out the hog pen and made it home? Made it when you had that feeling that, man, I'm glad I got out of there and I'm glad to be where I am. Anyone, you guys chime in on that, either one. Anthony, I see you, I'm looking at you.
You know what happened?
What happened?
Governor, you was in the church when that preacher preached, Mitchell. And he spoke about, I don't know when you was at 8 or 11, which one he preached both services. He talked about the man that was paralyzed, and he had 4 friends. And we're talking about the many faces of addiction. Them 4 friends were faces of addiction. They had to lift down and lift their paralyzed friend up from the ground. Addiction will paralyze you. And it didn't matter it didn't matter at that point what color you wore, what office you held. All that mattered was he was paralyzed. And he was at that point. Like the prodigal son that said, I've come to myself. He was paralyzed. And here's the thing. When we get to that point, sometimes we need some help. The Lord, I believe, God has sent you from Trenton to give us some help. Right? I don't know whether this is just me talking, right? Because it ain't nothing for Pastor to get right now. He don't want nothing. You his friend. And you come to church. And you sit right there. I watch you. You love believers. And he said, listen, I don't care what happened. I need my 4 friends to get me to Jesus. Now, Jesus may be too much for these people in here, but whatever your Jesus is, just get me to some help. They said, he got him to the church house. And guess what? Sometimes there's some obstacles in front of us when we want to get clean. The church house was full of people. But his friends got to be determined friends. They were determined to get that man to Jesus. Guess what they had to do? They had to go through the ceiling. Guess what? Whether you know it or not, Sandy rocked the foundation. There's a crack in our ceiling. If it rained hard enough, you will see it. But guess what? Don't matter how it rained, how hard it rained, the people won't live, won't move. Guess what? They got him to Jesus. And Jesus healed him. All we're looking for is a little healing. I don't know how it's going to come or where it's going to come from, but just get us to Jesus. Whatever your Jesus may be, that's the point we get to. When it don't even matter. No matter what color, what job you got, what you don't have, just get me some help.
All right.
That's what the addict hit. Get me some help.
All right. Okay. Now I'm taking the collection. Valerie, you want to talk about that?
You know, even with 17 years clean, my most awesome moment is right now. Because as I said, being down the street in Baxter Terrace, I remember coming up to this church, not coming inside, but coming up to the church and praying, God help me. I hear my grandmother telling me, Jesus help me. And you said, your mother said, the answer could be no. Well, the answer way back then was not now. Boy. And here I am 17 years later, with a 360 degree from a 33-year drug addiction, 17 years clean.
Wow.
And I thank the Lord for that.
You want to wrap up for?
Well, the reality is, for me, I was living a certain lifestyle for so long, I didn't know this existed. It took for me, like I said, to meet some wonderful people that just stirred me in the right direction and gave me the information that I needed to be the person that I am today. So I no longer allowed shame, guilt, or any of that to hold me hostage. I'm not going to allow you or anybody else to hold me back from the woman that I am today. You know, and it's only through the grace of God.
Governor, you want to just wrap up here?
You know, for me, you're looking at the people that we should be caring about. And they just represent millions and millions of other folks who are at different stages of all this. And every day at different stages of it. Different stages of acceptance, at different stages of guilt, at different stages of treatment, at different stages of recovery. And what I know is that if we're willing to invest the time and willing to invest the heart and the money that we need to do it, that none of God's creatures are beyond salvation. And these folks right up here are extraordinary representatives of that. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Give them a hand, guys.
First off, I want to thank all of you for being here today. It is incredibly gratifying to know that all the different faces that I see out here, and I know many of the faces out here, are willing to join us in the effort that we're making here to try to change the way we deal with these issues and the way we deal with each other. And I can't thank Pastor Joe enough for his willingness to be a big part of this. Now, the fact is that there's no one of us who's going to be able to help to get the folks the help they need by ourselves. We're all going to have to work with each other to be able to do this. But what drives me to do it is two things. One is to know that what everyone said here today is absolutely true. It can and does happen to anyone. Not only can happen to anyone, it does happen to anyone. Can sounds speculative. It does. And all the different faces you've seen up here today whose lives have been affected by this directly or indirectly, it can and does happen to anyone. The second thing is that there are very few opportunities we have in life to make miracles happen. See, we think about miracles as faraway things sometimes that we read about. But I can tell you from my experience with this that when you get involved in dealing with folks who have this disease and helping to give them the tools to be able to deal with that disease and to save their own lives, that is God's miracle happening on earth right before your very eyes. And there's nothing more important than that, and there's nothing more gratifying than that, and there's nothing more uplifting than that. Because every one of these lives is an individual gift from God and has to be treated that way. And so the fact that you're all here and willing to be part of it, whether it's the first moments that you're actually thinking and listening about this, or whether you've been involved in this for most of your life, whether you have a family member or a friend who's been affected by this disease, or whether you just are one of the lucky few who haven't had it touch you directly or indirectly yet, but want to be a part of the solution for those who have had it touch them. I thank all of you for your willingness to be involved in doing this, and we're gonna work together to make sure that our state becomes a place where people who have this disease know that the tools are there and that we're going to help lead them to them. And if we do that, then we will have done something really, really good. So thank you all for being here today. I'll thank my partner here, Pastor Carter, in this, and turn it over to him, because he always, not only does the collection, Governor, but he always has the last word in this building. I guarantee you that. So thank you all very much.
Well, just thank you for coming. And let's give everybody a hand who worked so hard to put this together. Marie, her team, everybody. Wonderful job. We need a continued, ongoing effort. We need to gather together more. We need this more. Preferably, we don't have to wait till next September to come back together. We can move this throughout the state of New Jersey. The next one needs to be down South Jersey, Middlesex County, or Hudson County, Jersey City. We need to move this around and to keep this ongoing effort going. Thank you so much, all of our panelists. Fine job well done. Before we leave, I'd like to offer a word of prayer and ask God's blessing on this, that we not just sit here and talk. There's old saying, old preachers used to say it, without God, we cannot. Without us, God will not. We need his help, and he's going to need us to step up and do all we can. We teach at the New Hope Church, well, there's a blessing in the benediction. We don't just leave church. We believe it's serious to leave with God's blessing on you. And I don't know about you guys, I need every blessing I can get. So let's pray. God, we thank you now for this day and for the leadership through Governor Chris Christie and his phenomenal staff to work together, for the pastors and law enforcement and all who are gathered here today, social workers. We need your help. Now, God, bless us indeed and Give us wisdom for understanding. Give us strength to do the things necessary that you want done. And we can only do it with your power, to the praise of your glory. And all of God's people said amen. God bless you. Thank you so much.